Hi guys, find out how this guy wants to be subdued by his office mate, playing all kinds of BDSM games. Welcome to Worth Recap. This time I bring you the summary of the movie Love and Leashes. It all starts with Young Ji-woo explaining that in a relationship there will always be the instinctive desire to dominate a person or to be dominated by that person. We then go into an office where he meets his partner Young Ji-woo. Shortly after, his boss, Mr. Won, arrives and congratulates Ji-woo for arriving early. Jin-woo is not congratulated even though she is also early. Won later introduces Jin-woo as the new PR manager, then informs his subordinates that the process for hiring a YouTuber is going very well. Jin-woo tells Won that he does not agree with his hiring, since it could cause controversy due to the homophobia case in which the YouTuber is related. Won ignores Jin-woo's comment, but when Jin-woo says the same thing, Won considers his opinion, which makes Jin-woo upset. After the meeting, Jin-woo is talking to her friend and confesses that she likes Jin-woo. Jin-woo immediately approaches and thanks Jin-woo for informing the team of the case with the YouTuber and prevent a disaster. At night, Jin-woo lives with his mother and she advises him to behave more feminine in front of Jin-woo, in order to get his attention. However, Jin-woo does not like the idea since he considers that mentality is very archaic. In the morning, Jin-woo is in the courier looking for a package and the manager of the place informs him that the package was delivered to Jin-woo by mistake. Jin-woo immediately goes out looking for Jin-woo to retrieve the package from her. However, she doesn't make it in time and sees that Jin-woo has already opened the package containing a necklace for one person. Jin-woo immediately makes up the excuse that the collar is for his dog and tries to take his package. However, because of his nerves, he ends up throwing it and a BDSM magazine falls out, which Jin-woo can see. Jin-woo immediately leaves of the place. At lunchtime, Jin-woo is very nervous as he is afraid that Jin-woo will reveal the kind of tastes he has. At night, he finds himself writing on a page of like-minded people and advises her not to say anything until he can trust her. For his part, Jin-woo is jogging when he passes by an SM store and imagines Jin-woo trying to put the necklace on her, but she refuses to imagine the situation. Shortly after, her mother arrives and seeing her near the store, he offers to buy her a necklace. The next day, Jin-woo tries to write Jin-woo a message thanking him for not revealing his secret, but before he can send it, he sees Jin-woo approaching the same room he was in, and because of his nerves tries to hide by putting on the head of a suit. Jin-woo enters the room and when he sees a person with his head on, he tries to find out who it is and approaches. This makes Jin-woo try to run away and ends up falling. Jin-woo comes to help him, discovering that it is Jin-woo, after which he personally thanks Jin-woo for keeping his secret. Then they start chatting and Jin-woo apologizes for having a dominant personality in front of Jin-woo and he interprets her words as if she likes BDSM. So he tells Jin-woo that she can trust him to vent her frustrations by treating him like a dog. She is surprised by what she just heard and tells Jin-woo that she doesn't have that type of tastes. Jin-woo is intrigued by what Jin-woo had told him and begins to look for information about BDSM, discovering that in BDSM there is dominance and submission. So he deduces that Jin-woo wants to be dominated. On the day of the scheduled event, Jin-woo tries to talk to Jin-woo, but she keeps her distance from him. At night, during a meeting, Jin-woo ends up sharing the table with Jin-woo and a friend of hers, and the latter talks about Jin-woo, and at that moment Jin-woo mutters the words unpleasant and disgusting, which affects Jin-woo. After the meeting, Jin-woo finds him crying to Jin-woo in the parking lot and she tries to comfort him. So Jin-woo confesses that he loved her and understands if she is disgusted, since his ex-girlfriend treated him the same way. Jin-woo tells her that he doesn't feel disgusted by him since he knows that everyone has different tastes and if she kept her distance it was not to bother him. So Jin-woo asks her to become his mistress, but she immediately refuses what he says, disappointed, and promises not to bother her again. At the office, Jin-woo sees Jin-woo interacting with other girls. That makes her jealous, so she asks Jin-woo to meet alone and tells him that she will not be his mistress, but she is curious about the subject so she wants to experience it. Then she blindfolds him and they start talking. Jin-woo flatters to Jin-woo for his honest attitude. She is moved by his words and tells him that she will think if she becomes his mistress. After her work it starts to rain. Jin-Woo meets with Jin-Woo and tells him that he will treat her very well by offering her umbrella. With this gesture Jin-Woo officially agrees to become her mistress. At her house, Jin-Woo investigates ways to become a good mistress, while Jin-Woo celebrates getting her first master. The next day they both meet and Jin-Woo gives Jin-Woo some glasses which serve as a sign that he wants to be dominated. Then he hands him a contract specifying the behavior of the dominant and dominated during and outside working hours with a validity of 3 months, in which sex has to be agreed by both parties. However, Jin-Woo assures Jin-Woo that he does not plan to touch her. At night they both meet in a motel for their first BDSM game. In this Jin-Woo is treated like a dog, however his performance is very exaggerated. So they end up kicked out of the motel. The next day at the office Jin-Woo, thanks to her session with Jin-Woo, takes a more domineering attitude with her boss which surprises Jin-Woo. Then they meet and she apologizes for being a bad mistress and promise it will be better. At night they both meet and Jin-Woo celebrates her birthday and gives her some heels, which she wears for the first time by stepping on them, which makes Jin-Woo very happy. Later Jin-Woo tells her about his hobby with BDSM, and this is because he likes the feeling of feeling broken, but only for her who sees his worst side and accepted it. The next day the company is joined by a new employee who has a pen with which he writes everything and has the function of recording voices. Won puts the new employee under Jin-Woo's care, and seeing how Jin-Woo behaves towards his subordinate, Jin-Woo feels threatened. Despite this, their relationship continues unchanged and they meet every day to try out a new BDSM game. However, Jin-Woo, seeing Jin-Woo's interactions with his subordinate, begins to feel more anxious every day. One day Jin-Woo meets the new employee and discovers that he likes the aggressive way Jin-Woo treats him. That night they both meet at the office and Jin-Woo expresses her discomfort by complaining to her. That's why Jin-Woo starts with a game and tells him that if he wants it to stop, he just has to take off his glasses. Jin-Woo ties him up and begins to move a belt without touching him so that he learns to separate work life from pleasure. After this Jin-Woo begs Jin-Woo for some physical or verbal punishment. Because of this she starts insulting him while he messes up the office. They then leave the office before being discovered very happy. After this, they both enjoy their relationship more. Because of this the game levels up with whipping that hurts Jin-Woo, although after the game Jin-Woo begins to question the relationship he has with Jin-Woo. Later Jin-Woo's ex-girlfriend tries to contact him, but he ignores her as she has plans with Jin-Woo to get out of her. That day Jin-Woo orders Jin-Woo to spend the whole day together and handcuffs him to her, which doesn't work out very well, and in the middle of the date she confesses to Jin-Woo, but he rejects her, saying no, he wants to go out with her since he keeps thinking about how his ex-girlfriend treated him. From here both return to their normal lives without more games, until one day Jin-Woo reminds Jin-Woo that his contract is about to expire, so they will have one last game. Jin-Woo prepares to perform bondage on Jin-Woo while he cooks dinner for her. The meeting time arrives and someone knocks on Jin-Woo's door and he opens it thinking it's Jin-Woo, but he meets his ex-girlfriend and knowing that he is happy in a relationship he destroys his work and tells Jin-Woo that he can never have a relationship. Shortly after Jin-Woo arrives and enters Jin-Woo's apartment and he apologizes for not having anything. She says that it doesn't matter and they continue with the game. In the middle of this Jin-Woo says that because it is the last time they will arrive until the end. But before it happens she remembers Jin-Woo's words and stops him. Then asks him to express his feelings and he tells her that he is afraid of loving her and then losing her. After hearing it she leaves. The next day Jin-Woo doesn't go to work and stays at her mother's house, who pampers her and tries to cheer her up. Meanwhile Jin-Woo meets with Jin-Woo's friend Haimi to talk about her problems and feelings. After listening to him she advises him to be honest with himself. Meanwhile, in the office, Jin-Woo's subordinate is reviewing the recordings of the pen and discovers one from the night that Jin-Woo and Jin-Woo had their game inside the office, and immediately sends Jin-Woo to warn him of what he found, but by mistake he sends it to the entire office. The next day Jin Woo's subordinate resigns and Mr. Won calls Jin Woo to his office and complains about his behavior, then calls Jin Hoo, who doesn't know what's going on, and shows him the recording. Jin Hoo tries to contact Jin Woo to apologize, but she ignores him. The next day Jin Woo and Jin Hoo are called in for a disciplinary hearing. All the criticism and ridicule is directed only at Jin Woo, so Jin Hoo gets fed up and starts defending her, saying that he is to blame for everything since he asked her to. Then he declares that he loves her since she is a wonderful woman who cares about others, is honest and strong, complaining to the council for discriminating against her in front of him. Jin Woo is surprised by Jin Hoo's statement but accepts it, then both resign from the company and leave the company together. However, Jin Woo does not intend to let them get away with treating her like this, so he goes to his former subordinate to ask for more recordings of the office and makes them public. While they move on to a formal relationship of mutual love. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to see more videos like this. If you wanted to see more, I recommend this action movie.